That's the phone call. I'll be right back. Just 15 minutes. Audio, video, or something.
Should we be hearing something that I'm not?
Mariah, we all set?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay. No, I could see that you were doing something, so I didn't
No,
want to.
it's started. I'm just trying to find the email from Peter Graham, but you guys are good to call to order.
Okay. We're going to call today's meeting to order at 3:05. Last week I received, as well as everyone else, some paperwork from Mariah and Brian, and apparently they attended a meeting, I believe, between Valley Housing Consultant and Leeds, and the diagrams, paperwork is somewhat technical, and since I didn't attend it, Meyer and Brian will possibly be attending at some point. Will fill us in on what this was about and how it came about, and what decisions we need to make today.
Yeah. So one thing is just, I think Denise, I don't know that you renewed your term, so I don't know if you're a voting member of the committee anymore.
What? I don't understand. I thought I did.
I don't think so. Let me see.
It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that I went down. You mean to get sworn in again?
Yeah.
It could have been an oversight because like I wasn't getting the emails for a while.
Well, I guess I will look for that later, but I don't think you guys are gonna be voting on anything today, but
Do you need me to swing by the town hall or something?
well, I thought that Betsy had sent over a list of people who were on the senior housing committee and who had been reappointed and sworn in, but I'm not finding it right now, and it's probably buried in my email.
All right, if you
So-
don't find it and you need me to come by, just let me know, okay?
Yeah.
To do it's a yearly thing or whatever.
Didn't do nothing last year.
So he stopped.
So Brian and I had two really interesting meetings in the past couple of weeks about housing. One of them was with Rural Development Inc. Out of Montague, and then another was with a consulting firm who FERCOG connected us with, and we kind of wanted to talk to you all about both of those meetings. And I and figure out kind of just where we're at with this. I know it's been a while since you all have met, probably about a year, and just kind of regroup. So the first meeting that we went to with, can you all just mute if you're not talking so we don't get the background noise? There should be a little microphone that you can press that should mute you. And feel free to chime in, unmute yourself if you want to say something. I don't want to get all the background stuff. So the first one that Brian and I went to, first meeting, was a meeting with Gina Gavani and Peter Graham. Gina is from the Housing Authority, but also from Rural Development Inc. And Peter is a consultant from Valley Housing Consultants. And they had wanted to talk to us about the property, the RFP that failed last time, and kind of we had some questions just going forward, what we should reasonably expect from developers to be interested in. And they were able to get back to us with kind of how they do their numbers, which are the pro formas that I sent out to you all, which are complicated and probably don't mean a lot on their own. But with the conversation that we had with Peter and Gina, it makes a little bit more sense. And Brian, I'm going to ask you to jump in if I get something wrong, because I'm going to try to remember the conversation. But
should we put one of them up on the screen just so we can sort of use that as an example?
Yeah, I can do that. I also have the email that Peter had sent over that kind of explains some of it. Let's see. So there should be, so Peter's email is kind of what explains the pro formas that he sent out. And the pro formas are just the numbers that go into when they're trying to figure out what their return on investment is and how much funding they need, and what kind of tax credits they can get. They put all of that into, their spreadsheet, and it come out with different numbers. So basically, the first pro forma set was what he referred to as high debt, high rent, which was a total of 50 units, 34 affordable, and 16 market rate. And one of the comments that he had was that because Franklin County's market rate rents are so low, or the gap between affordable rents and market rate rents is so low, there's not a big spread there. So really, developers don't make money on market rate apartment complexes around here at this scale. So if you're building new, the spread between affordable housing and the market rate is just not big enough to generally make it worthwhile, because what makes the affordable housing worthwhile for a developer is all of the tax credits. And so the market rate units in this budget would have to be about $1,900 for a 1-bedroom and $2,400 for a 3-bedroom. And he didn't think that the local market could support that. If we were in Boston, that would be a different story, because the spread between affordable housing and the market rate would be a lot bigger. The second budget that he sent over was with market rents at 80% of the AMI level, which is just where the cusp of affordability is. And that was with a 1-bedroom being at about $1,300 and a 3-bedroom being at about $1,800. And he said that, again, this wouldn't balance, and it results in a gap of $1.3 million. The last budget was 34 all affordable. And that would all be family housing. So senior housing is just, they don't feel that Irving can support senior housing and that the tax credits would be there for them. And there's a whole bunch of different funding sources, but basically that was the gist of it. And Brian, chime in because my brain's a little bit melted right now. And explain a little bit more about kind of the nuances of it.
Do you mind pulling up one of those pro formas while I do that? I just want to add a little context. It's not necessarily that Irving can't support senior housing. So I think we all are very clear that as a county, we have an aging population and we have a need for the ability for our residents to age in place. And so that's the whole reason that you've all gone down this road. What they're saying is that the financial model, these tax credits that come from the state and federal government that make these projects doable, they have a competitive nature to them. And so we heard that when you all worked with Laura Schufelt from the Mass Housing Partnership, and she articulated that sometimes you have to apply 2 or 3 times to get your project even through that review process. When they're doing that competitive analysis, they're looking and they're prioritizing family affordable projects right now. And anything that has more restrictions or cutouts become less competitive. And so when a developer's thinking about taking on a project and responding to an RFP like we've drafted, they're going to look for a project that, one, meets their financial mix and their needs, reduces the potential debt that they may hold on this property, and then 3, makes the project the most advantageous in terms of applying for these tax credits. So if we simply go a senior housing alone project that also tries to force approximately 50 units, and he got the 50 unit number from splitting, we allowed a range of 40 to 60 units in our RFP. So he just cut that down the middle for the sake of the example. So if our RFP is structured in a way that's trying to force a developer to come up with 50 units, X amount of them, market rate, they're going to have to carry a debt load. They're then going to have to generate rents of a particular amount each month, which is what Mariah just reviewed. And then that project becomes less tenable, right? So for instance, here's an example of that third example that Peter, I will keep forgetting his name, I apologize, was discussing. All affordable units, just 34. But here's an example of what, do you mind scrolling just a little bit further down? So the top section are your sources of funds, and you can see all those tax credits and those different forms of financial assistance that makes that project possible. They would have to take out a short-term construction loan of $10.5 million to build this 34-unit complex. And then they would source all of these different housing tax credits, bringing those in to then provide the actual financing for this project. So at the end of this, you can see where the 2 things sort of net out. The subtotal is that 24 million. That construction loan gets repaid with all these sources of funds that they would bring in. And so it brings it back into 13.6 million for this entire project. So they've got a cash flow calculated into this. And then if you scroll down to the construction costs, including engineering and their contingencies, it balances out to that 13,678,000. So this is an example of how a developer approaches these projects, and they're trying to balance those reasonably anticipated revenues and all those different sources with what they can carry in terms of a construction costs. And the 2 things should match. In the examples where there were 50 units and you had 16 of them, say, at market rate, and he was trying to generate an example of what that monthly income would be for a 1-bedroom up to a 3-bedroom, the issue was in those models, if you looked at them, when you go back up to, or when you go to the construction costs, they were carrying a debt that will not be covered by any of those funding sources. So if we scroll down a little bit more, so now the project cost has increased to 17.9 million. So now they have about 4 million plus that they have to carry as a long-term debt on the property. And they're going to be using the market income to pay that debt off, because you can't use any of that tax credit funds to pay that debt. That's where some of the struggle, now it's, I know Laura was trying to explain that to us when we were working on that RFP, and I think I walked into that thinking market rate was going to make this a project that's doable. And she was actually saying it's actually the inverse that's true. And now that you see these numbers coming together, it does make a little more sense why it's harder to balance this project with the market rate. What we weren't anticipating back when we worked on this project with Laura is that a strict restriction on age eligibility to live at the complex would potentially also make attaining some of these tax credits more challenging. So to Mariah's point, going through this exercise with Rural Development Inc. has been helpful. I wanted to note that Rural Development Inc., and you all remember working with the Housing Authority a few years ago. I know we kind of got a little uncomfortable with how close the two relationships had gotten between the town and the Housing Authority, and we wanted to tease those two things back out in case they wanted to be an applicant. We've broached that topic with them. They have a nonprofit development arm called Rural Development Inc. They are two separate entities, but they work together on a lot of projects. And so they have restated that Rural Development Inc. would be very interested in responding to an RFP if we were to issue one. They're very clear that we would have to do a public procurement process. They know that we can't just hand this project to them. They offered this analysis to us to help us understand where a developer's coming from when they look at these RFPs, and if they're trying to decide whether or not they really can craft a response for you. What's going on behind the scenes. This is a view into that world that I didn't receive when we had a failed RFP process before. So I think this definitely helped me understand why maybe our RFP was not as attractive maybe to the developer market as I think I originally assumed it would have been. So I definitely think this is helpful. And then we have this new, I guess, piece of information about how the state and the federal government are looking at these tax credits and whether or not they're ranking projects that are age restricted as highly as generalized affordable housing. And now what do we do with this information now that we have it?
I think one of the things that Brian and I have been doing research on was the senior aspect of this, of senior specific housing. And a conversation we had several months ago with someone said it is possible. I know that we've brought up before, we don't have any affordable housing in Irving. And so someone had told us at the Department of Housing and Community Development that we wouldn't be outright not allowed to do it. But what we've come to understand through that conversation and this most recent conversation is that we would be extremely low on the funding priority list. And the likelihood that this project would be funded with any kind of support seems incredibly unlikely. And if it was, it would take many years likely. And I don't know that a developer would stick around for that long to apply and reapply for however long. So I think even though it's not outright banned, the likelihood that we would be able to have all senior housing here in Irving is extremely low. And I think that is the biggest piece of information that we have gotten, along with these numbers of how they kind of make it work.
Right.
And I realize that that can mean a big departure from clearly the work that you've all been doing for several years now.
That was a lot of information to throw at all of you, so I'm sure you all need time to digest that. But are there any questions that are raised?
My question would be, let me think about this for a second. My question would be is there a need in Franklin County? There may not be a need in Irving specifically, but is there a need in Franklin County for senior housing? And
Yes.
if
Yes.
there is, then why would that, why would we be having a problem
So
attracting those people?
it's not necessarily a problem of attracting those people. It's that we're limiting it to those people. So you could have family affordable housing, which is open to anyone of any age. And that is what they're doing these numbers off of having it be just open housing, a mix of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms, which, seniors could, if they were by themselves or part of a couple, they might rent a 1-bedroom apartment and it would be the same thing. It would just not be restricted to an age group. One question that we did ask was, could we have 1 bedrooms separated from the 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, which are more likely to have multi-generational families? So that if there was, 1 bedroom apartments that had, couples or single people of any age, it's more likely to be quieter, I guess, than having families with children around. So that's kind of the difference. It's not necessarily a difference of attracting seniors, because I agree, Bill, Franklin County it's aging. I think we have the need. I think that the state sees it as limiting and would rather fund just open housing.
That's the challenge is the developers are going to go where the money is. And even if they are excited about our piece of property, the resources like the senior center and the library, the school and close by, I mean, you have a wonderful location. Every time we talk to somebody, they talk about how ready the location is with the utilities already in the ground. You've poised our community well to do a project. The concern is that the state and the feds, when they're awarding these tax credits that make these projects viable, they're going to prioritize a project that has affordability for multi-generations at a higher level than something that's age restricted. And so even though we've done all of these investments, it may just be a harder uphill fight or competition for these tax credits. And to Mariah's point, you're trying to attract a developer and convincing them that Irving's worth staying for. And so if this takes years for them to get their application through, we don't want them to lose interest in the property and walk away from it. They may think it's a hard sell to begin with and therefore not even put in the proposal, even if we have a great site. And I think those are some of the challenges that we're now realizing exist.
I have a question, Brian. So this, can it be just over 55 and not affordable? Like,
if you go back to not doing the affordable, then the tax credits come
out
completely out of this.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what
and
I need to understand.
exactly. And I think the challenge with that, as soon as you start talking about X amount of units and numbers of stories, they all have to be ADA compliant. So you're talking elevators, you start building in these hard costs that have to then be spread out amongst the residents of the project. And so if you're going to carry a debt load of $10 million, you have to then be able to generate enough revenue to not only manage the property, to do the annual maintenance, but then to pay back that debt load. And I think that's what's turning some potential developers in Franklin County off from these larger projects. They don't mind doing smaller projects with a few units because they don't have these shared costs.
So Sunderland, Brian, Sunderland, they're going forward with it.
Correct.
Because of their location?
They're going forward. I know they have, it's senior housing was the initial goal. I don't know if they changed any of the age eligibility for that one, but that's also only 33 units, I believe. 30 in the new section.
It is affordable. So and Sunderland has other affordable housing that is open to families. So
right.
They've already met some of that standard of offering open family, multi-generational, affordable housing. So now they're able to say, well, we do think it's worth funding senior housing in this area. And I think particularly for the argument in Sunderland is probably that your standard 1-bedroom apartment is probably taken up by students and professors. So there is a lack of affordable, smaller units for our seniors. Becky, did you have a question?
Yes, because this really does kind of change what I guess our vision was, or what I feel the committee's vision and also the town's vision of what it was going to be. And what about, we had that other piece of property that we had thought we could develop later for, what was it, like townhouses and stuff?
Yep.
Would there be a way to put that in where that was family, and then up near the senior center in that area would be for 55 and older? Would that make it more attractive to a developer? And I don't know how much money that's going to be. I'm just saying it would then keep what we had envisioned up by the senior center and the library and the school a little more within what we had envisioned for it. So if we had offered the developer that piece of land to do housing of any kind, and then we get affordable senior housing or 55 and over. Because I'm just going by things that I've heard, and Paula can probably address this more because she hears what the seniors are talking about. But I think most people were viewing it as a place where you could retire and not have families and kids running around, and so that's just another thing that we could look at. I mean, I don't know what it would entail, but like you said, this was a lot to take in today because it changes
Everything.
the whole concept. And if it is going to be a different concept, then I think the committee would need to have a different makeup. Some people who are in that younger age range to say, yeah, kids, this is what those families would want to attract people there.
So to respond to you, Becky, I think that's a really important point that we need to run. If I want to recognize the consultant that this Peter gentleman, he's not being paid by us. He doesn't work for us. And so anything he's doing, he's just sharing information right now. So it would be interesting to run that idea back in front of him, and we have the zoning information when we had that property surveyed. Mariah,
What property? Hold on 1 second. What property?
I'm going to tell you about that. So this all predates Mariah's time with us. So there is a adjacent piece of property along the railroad tracks that abuts the back end of the 5-acre parcel that we had planned for senior housing, and it connects you to Route 2. So the town had considered, and this committee had considered, what if we did a 2-phase development? The state had told us we couldn't do age restriction on both properties. And if we wanted to do it on one, they may support that and be fine with that, but we couldn't do it on both. And so there was a question, do we release both parcels as housing development? A developer could do townhouses on one, or some construction on one coming off of Route 2. The senior building would be off of Care Drive. Because the two properties are adjacent, they could be connected by sidewalks or some type of path. And that would connect everybody, almost take Weatherheads and the sidewalk that starts on 7th Drive and make a full loop all the way through the neighborhoods so that it would be walkable. That was part of the vision. And we had a survey done with some wetland delineation and some zoning analysis done. So we do have that information, and we could put that back out to this consultant and just say, from your experience, what would a 2-phase project, multi-generational but split by parcel, look like? And is that even something that developers would be attracted to? And we could bring that information back to you if he's willing to offer some opinion on that. It may get to a point though where if we want more analysis, we may have to be willing to pay somebody working for us to do that greater analysis like we did when we hired Berkshire Design.
I think that's a really interesting idea, Becky. I think one thing that might come up is the state might say, we'll fund this, but only if you do the family housing first. And I think that the town would just need to be prepared for that of, you know, it's not a short time period to get these projects going and then completed. So you're looking at maybe, you know, 5 years out or more by the time you have a completed, you know, phase 1 of family housing, and then potentially another 5 years after that for senior housing. So 10 years out by the time you have completed senior housing. And that's if things keep moving along without interruption. So I think that's a great idea that we should run past him. I just think that the logistics of this are a lot more than probably the average person realizes.
But I think the other thing that to keep in mind too, is people have wanted senior housing in Irving for a long time. And when this committee was formed, we thought within 5 years, and there's no way. And so it's been a number of years anyway. And I know some people are joking, by the time we get senior housing, I'll be dead. But if we at least have something in the works and saying, this is what we plan, now we have something to plan. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there for consideration, but as it stands now, we have nothing in the works that we can tell people, oh, within 5 years, you're going to have senior housing. That's not even a possibility. So.
Can I ask, just going back, you had asked a two-phase question, Becky, so I want to make sure we hit the second part of your question. But before we do that, with this committee, you have money set aside. We moved money out of the revolving home loan fund probably 4 years ago now for you to do some consulting work and to have somebody assist you. So I know we have money set aside. I think we have $15,000 left. I'll have to double check. Would you want us to potentially contract with a consultant to help do a little more exploration on this for you and give you this data? Again, somebody working on your behalf to pull these numbers together and to give you this expertise? I don't know who that is, and I'm not saying we should go pick the person that is currently offering this information, but I'd be willing to find out who other towns are using so you can have somebody working on your behalf to get you some of this information.
For me, I think that would be the way to go, so that we at least have a basis so we can support whichever way we decide. Like we had decided to go for senior housing, and we had that information before, so we had something to base it on. Now we have a little bit more information, but we don't know how it would be if we made it a two-phase project so that we could still get senior housing. So my opinion is yes, to spend some of that money. And I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, but that's my.
I just have a question. When you talk about family housing, okay, what are you know, it can be interpreted in many ways. So what exactly is family housing? Like, in other words, every time I think of family housing, I think of Leiden Woods.
Oh, court.
So it just means that there's no age restriction. So
but what about the dot? Like, in other words, Mariah, what we're trying to get at is we don't want Oak Courts or we don't want Leiden Woods.
What does that mean?
Low, it's so affordable family housing is what compared to, like, I don't know if Leiden Woods is subsidized or low income. Do you know, Brian?
Ish. And I think that we should bring in an expert to help you with this. But I think the one thing that we all learned 2 years ago when we were going through this process with Laura, that the stereotype that exists in our head, we can all name a housing development that we maybe have some concerns or negative connotations about. And I know that there's also a concern about housing that has been subsidized by the government or managed by a government entity that has poor maintenance. And I know you all were very clear when we toured properties that you did not want a facility that had poor maintenance. So we have been very clear with whomever we talk to that these are the concerns of the community. But I think Laura did a really good job of helping us understand that the average monthly income is based on Franklin County residents and our average monthly income. So that grid of one person households, 2-person households is all based on our average monthly income. So it's not Boston putting their numbers on Franklin County. You're talking about your neighbors. And I don't have the grid in front of me, but it was over $30,000 for a single person to meet and qualify for some of these standards of affordability. I mean, that's more than what people living on SSI are making. And so when we're talking about one of your peers in the community, one of your neighbors who is saying, I just want to age in place, and we're trying to figure out affordability, they're easily going to meet these thresholds if they're living on Social Security or on a pension plan from that standpoint alone. As we start to think about what family housing looks like, and you're talking about it could be a two-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, yeah, does that bring in the possibility that children could live there? Of course. And is that a change in the vision, as Becky was noting? I think that that's important to be honest and say, yeah, that is a change in the initial vision. I think the bigger question is management. When you all talk about the facilities that you're concerned about and what you don't want this facility to have characteristics like, to me, that comes back to the maintenance and the management of those properties. And when you put this plan together and the RFP, part of that RFP plan was to see who the management firm would be, what the references were for the management, understanding what their maintenance plans are. So if we go down this RFP road still, I say you remain as stringent on the management portion of this and the maintenance portion of this as possible. One other piece that Mariah and I have expressed to the few developers that we've talked to about this, we don't want that aesthetic look of boxy government housing, which I know that you've also articulated as something that is not preferable. And when we did the information sessions with Mass Housing, and we brought community members to the community center and they looked at the different aesthetics that they liked, it was very clear that they wanted something that reflected the character and the architecture of the community, though we don't really have a stated architecture for Irving. We've been very upfront about that, and they've shown us some imagery. I kind of want to bring up one example. Do you remember what that name of that housing development was? Was it Bostitch Farms?
I think it's Bostwick. Yeah, Bostwick in Great Barrington.
We wanted to be really clear with them that we have aesthetic concerns, and in the modern approach to some of these developments is to move away from that, what we would call government housing, and move towards something that's a little more attractive. So here's an example of a project that the gentleman that we were talking to has consulted on in the past. This is in Great Barrington. This is the exterior. This was a complex that already existed with a renovation and an addition. So I believe they redid the exterior siding and the roofing on it. And they have a visual of their community room. I don't know if we can find that quickly. Let me see if I can find it on my side. Bostwick.
Yeah, I don't see it. I don't think.
Community room. And this is, I believe, primarily, this Bostwick Farms is primarily senior housing.
The other example, like you said, Paula, is the one in Sunderland that they're building. And that would be, that's being built by the same RDI that we have been talking with.
Okay. Can I take screen share real quick?
Yeah.
Where did my tools go? There they are. Show screen.
Brian, while you're doing that, I think Keith had his hand up
Oh, I'm sorry, Keith.
a little while ago. So, Keith, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had some questions. One of the questions I had was reiterating what Rebecca said. Could we increase the amount of units? I know we decided on 60 units, but do we have enough land to increase the amount of units for the senior housing, plus separate buildings like Rebecca suggested for family buildings down below in that other section, so that we could attract more contractors maybe, instead of limiting us to 60. Do we have that availability to go to 80 maybe, or 70 or so?
You have physical space. None of this meets our zoning. So whomever builds this is going to get a friendly 40B, which is a zoning reference to the statutes, waiver basically to be able to build any of these buildings. You don't have apartment buildings in Irving, so this doesn't meet our zoning at all. So yes, there's flexibility. The question is going to be more about what a developer is going to balance in terms of what we're seeking in an RFP and in terms of the housing mix that you're describing, and can they balance that with their financing model? So they'll go back to that construction and revenue conversation that we just saw an example of. So for the model that Peter came up with, 34 units of affordable was the most advantageous model he could come up with based on just looking at that one parcel. If we go back and say, well, we have two parcels and that increases, you have two entry points, it increases your square footage or your acreage. What does this allow for? They would have to go back and do that analysis again. So it could come back and 50 may work if you've got two different parcels to work with. I'm not well versed enough on how a developer approaches that work to answer that for you today, but that would be the approach that we would have to ask them to go back through again. It's worth asking.
The other thing that comes up often when you're increasing the amount of units is if you have to build up, it has to kind of equal out. So if you're adding, an elevator on each end and another level, the amount of units has to cover the cost of adding another elevator, adding another floor, et cetera. So that's part of what they crunch. And like Brian said, I also don't know how they figure it out. And 34 was the number that made sense to them when they did it. But yeah, if we propose more land, they might say the number is actually 53 or whatever.
So just to give you,
we were limiting it to 60 units or so, or 34 or whatever you say. So maybe it would be better, advantageous for us to increase the amount that we can maybe get up there instead of 50 or 60.
You can't have to ask the question. I mean, I think we to all of your points, we have the land, and the select board has already initially issued a general sense of being okay that both parcels could be used for housing. And so I think it would be a fair question to ask a developer. How does this change the mix? We did not ask that question, so we could. And the worst they're going to do is come back and say that doesn't change the calculus. But then we'll be wiser for that information. So just to quickly give you, and I have not visited this location, Great Barrington is in the Berkshires, the southern section. So just some exterior photos. I was trying to get to this community center photo within their building. And this is affordable units. This is their lobby in this new renovated building. There was another website that had one of those 360 views so you could turn it around the lobby. But this isn't what you've visited before when we've done our tours and you saw locations that maybe didn't meet aesthetically, or I know there was a lot of concerns about seniors or people living there feeling isolated in their apartments. And we did not want it to feel boxed off and closed off. And so this is the style that architects are approaching for these affordable housing developments, where you do have gathering spaces, you do have open space. It does feel modern, but it doesn't look like it doesn't belong in the community. So they offered this as a recent project. I think they said that this work was done in just the last few years. Some examples of what the units look like. So I just show that to you, not to say that this is the model that we should follow, but I think this feels very different than some of the imagery that was coming to my mind when we first started this work many years ago. And some of the places that we toured and noted that we were concerned.
Mhm.
Going back to the additional funds that we have to look at increasing the project or whatever the committee might decide in the near future. The basic concern I have is that what we were hearing from the community was basically senior housing. And without a doubt, I mean, for decades, the state has been pushing affordable housing, period. And I know that if we went in that direction, we'd have affordable housing in the next 2 years. But I don't know that the town wants to go in that direction. Because with affordable housing, family housing, is going to come an increase to the Irving Elementary School, an increase to our budget, an increase to public safety, and it's just going to exponentially be an increase in government, period, in the town of Irving. And I'm not sure that we really want to go there. We've done a survey. I wouldn't be comfortable moving in that direction unless we did some type of survey and went back to the people and said, listen, this is where it's at. We can either do this or we can try to do a combination of this, something else, affordable housing and senior. I agree with Mariah that even if we present the two, the state's going to say, oh, well, we'll do the affordable housing first, and then we'll talk to you about the other later. We don't know that later will ever happen. And more than likely it won't, considering what we've already found out and discovered, that people are not interested in doing that for us. So, you know, my feeling is that I'd want to, before spending our money and going off in a direction that everybody's going to might say, stop, that's not what we asked for.
Right.
Maybe we should find out what the people are willing to accept, or if they're willing to accept a 50-50 situation where there's a family housing and senior housing.
Okay.
So one other thing that I just wanted to bring up was right now we have, I know you had mentioned townhouses at one point on that back parcel. And I think that if it does look like senior housing in this format that we're kind of looking at here, that's kind of, you know, a complex, it does not seem feasible. I think it's also worth thinking about whether affordable housing as either townhouses or just single family homes makes sense on that parcel. It would be a lot less units, and they would probably be sold rather than rented. But I think that that's another option.
So Mariah, when you say that, for example, that could be somebody, and I'm just using this as an example, Justin Fellows, he builds houses and sells houses. So if that property was available, someone could go there and put up, 20 houses and sell them, similar kind of to Lillian's Way.
Well, and Paula, to your point, I mean, we're thinking developer, and I think by default, we assume large because of what we've been talking about in terms of the apartment building.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be. It could be that the town issues an RFP for the second parcel, and we say, you know, we're looking for a housing development of these pieces with a restriction. We could vote with an age restriction or not. That's a will of the people and a authorization by the board. But it could be a smaller developer, and there's plenty of examples within the region where private developers, local developers have purchased larger parcels, subdivided it into smaller places that's one-story living, laundry on that same floor, and develop something of that nature. So you still accomplish the same thing, but it's sold rather than rented. Those are options. It doesn't have to be this huge multi-story apartment building, which is what we were initially thinking. Or it could be a combination of both, depending on which parcel we're talking about.
Well,
Right.
next, like in Greenfield, next to that church, something,
Silver-
what is it?
I think it's called Silver Acres or something of that nature.
Those are
Yep.
all condos, okay? And I believe it's an over 55 community.
Correct.
And
That
those
is-
are, that's an individual person
That was a
That-
private developer. Yep.
comes in, buys it, sells it, and makes money on each one. I
Right.
mean, that might even go faster.
Yeah.
Another possibility.
And so the other possibility is it could be, so there, you know, there's the age restriction aspect of whether or not you want it to be 55 plus or open to anyone. There's also the affordability restriction. So Habitat for Humanity also does developments of single or two family homes that are like what you're talking about, Paula, more like Lillian's Way, where it's, you know, a development with kind of more a single structure kind of on their own parcel. And that would be affordable versus like what you're talking about, where it's a for-profit Justin Fellows type developer. So I think there's a lot of kind of mixing and matching that you can do. You could have it be affordable and 55 plus. You could have it just be market rate 55 plus. You could have it be affordable and open to anyone. So there's some mixing and matching that you can do with something like that. And I think it's also worth asking Becky's question of, can we combine that with a larger development that you already had planned?
What's your question?
Paula and I just purchased some property up in Maine. And we're putting a park model home on it. So we own the property and we own the home. And there's 107 units on this property. Everybody owns their own. You can't rent it to anybody, only
Right.
family members. And it's this one happens to be just 3 season, and that's done for tax purposes. It could be 4 season if you wanted it to. But in a place like that where you had the property and you acred out so much land per unit, you could dictate and let if 55 and over in, they'd own their own home. They the units are 500 square feet. That's it. They're no bigger, and none of them
It's
are.
like a tiny home.
They're all the same, and they're one level, easy entry, easy out, and it's a condominium type atmosphere. And it
Right.
worked fine up there, and it's a gated community as well. You have to know the combination to open up the gate to get in.
Right.
It's a wonderful thing, and you wouldn't have to put out any money at all.
And it's like tiny homes. So in other words, and they make you follow the restrictions. Like
Yeah.
you can only go so far, you can't have this, and they fine you.
For instance, they won't let you have a hot tub outside out of your area. It's restrictive, but they have no problem bringing people in. And a lot of the people that are there are all over 55. I would say 95% of them are.
And it's affordable. So if you could go up there and you could purchase everything for like $150,000
Even less.
or less, and you own it, but could be a management property people.
A park model home, and you can, if you buy them, you can get them secondhand, but if you buy a brand new and have it
But
custom
you
made,
can't buy it new.
it's probably $70,000 or $80,000. And if most people are downsizing and selling their own property or that they have now, they probably have a little bit of money to spare and buy a new car.
And the property is beautiful. I mean, it's like Florida, you know, they put a Florida room on. It looks nothing like a motorhome community. They don't even allow that.
No, can't even park one there.
You can't park one there. So that's another way to think of the space for it.
Right. I think that just is one more example of there's many models to look at. And so just because our first model wasn't exactly what sparked interest, it doesn't mean that this project is not happening. I think we need to be maybe a little more open in terms of what we're willing to look at for models, and then to explore some of these options and incorporate this information that we've received. And to Bill's point, I think we may have to go back to the community at some point and maybe present to anybody who's interested what we've learned, and maybe get a larger direction, whether that's through surveys or a public meeting like this, and get a little more direction from the community about where they want the town to head. And if it's in the end 2 separate projects, well then we know it's 2 separate projects. And if it can be combined into the same project or different phases or any of those things, I don't think we have one direction at this point that we have to go in, which is sort of the point of reconvening you all, obviously giving you a chance to meet back up again and talk about what we've learned. But I don't think you need to make a decision today, and I don't think that the project is taking a specific direction today. I think we have more information to get for all of you, and I think you all need some time to think, and obviously the Board of Selectmen need to meet at some point and consider this information. They have not. So this was like probably the first of several meetings that we'll probably have to have this year to figure out where we're taking these initiatives forward. I just really quickly, I quickly looked up the account balance. You do have $14,000 left. So we do have money when you're ready to do a little consulting work and to maybe research something that you're interested in a little bit more about this. We have that money set aside for you.
How many acres was that first parcel that we were talking about?
The one behind Care Drive?
No, yeah, the one we were originally talking about for senior housing, not the one over the toward
a little over 5 acres. Developable only about 3 because you have some steep embankments, but the parcel itself is a little over 5.
And Brian, the other property, how many acres is that? The Grand Trunk?
I don't think it's very much.
I want to say that was just over 2.
Yep, 2 or almost 3. Mm-hmm.
And I felt most of it's flat though, so I do believe that buildable area there was about 1.7. That seems to stand out to me as acreage that was available, but it was a little over 2 for that parcel. It gets narrow past where we keep we call it the quarry, but the mounds of rocks and dirt that we use for different projects. Beyond there, it gets narrow by the railroad tracks, and it scoots behind the Lillian's Way and the elementary school before it abuts the property that we're all talking about on Care Drive.
I really think that, you know, us talking about other things is a really positive, but I think that all of us feel, and Becky brought it up, is that we really would like a community that's over 55 and not so much of a mix. And the perfect example is Weatherhead's Apartments, okay? There's a whole section over there that's older, and if all of them were older, it'd be great. But it's the younger that's killing it over there.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the parties and
Don't look at the police log.
The police log and all that, and it's only the younger, not to point fingers, but that's what's happening.
It is what it is. It's the younger. It's 3 apartments that causing the trouble.
It's just a whole different mix of people, and you can't prevent that. But if you had even tiny homes, you know, if people were to purchase a parcel and a tiny home, there still could be management for that whole property. And instead of having 60, you could probably have 100, but you should see how beautifully it's done. It's landscaped, there's walking paths, and so forth. So I would like to have that open as part of another thought process.
They've got a community room, they've got a swimming pool for all the inhabitants, they have laundry
Laundry.
facilities all around the property.
Gary and Paula, how many acres is this?
I don't think it's much more than 5. That's why we thought about it.
It may be a little more than that, but it's hard, it's wood, it's in the woods. And so I don't know how far back it goes, but it started out and mushroomed into what it is. So we're new at it, so maybe we could have you a little bit more information. Our home's supposed to be delivered up there in April or early May. Maybe we'll have a little more information for you on that, but I'd even invite you up to eyeball it because it is something to see and how they've done it and how immaculate it's kept.
So let me ask the committee this, do people want to think about what we take some time to digest what we heard today and then come back and in next meeting and make a decision on which direction we want to go in, or do we already know that?
I think we need senior housing. I don't think we need family housing, but I think we need senior housing, and that's what was originally our objective, was to look at senior housing. So I should suggest that we continue on until we run up against the stone wall. We might as well. That's what we were asked to do. Let's try to do it.
Even if we do it in
Even
another
we may
way.
have to think what that's all saying, outside the box, something like that.
Rebecca, same
Yes.
question?
No, I don't have a question.
No, I do. Do you have any feelings about that?
I would like some time to think about it because right now I am kind of leaning towards just senior housing because like Gary said, that's what everybody wanted, but yet I'm willing to find out more information and go to the town and see what they want too. But I don't feel right now like we can make I can make a decision based on what we know.
Denise?
I personally am looking for senior housing, but I can understand if it's not doable. I understand what you're saying. I'm 70 years old and I'm thinking I'll be 80 before something like this is going to be available to me, you know, if I'm still around. And do I want to listen to a bunch of little kids all the time or parties at night? Or, you know, it's not what I'm looking forward to in 5 or 10 years. So.
Keith?
I would like to explore senior housing also, but with an increase in the amount of units that we might be able to put in there, like Gary and Paula's suggestion. Where is that up in Maine, Gary?
You're muted.
Unmute, you're muted.
It's in Wells. If you're familiar with Route 1 and the main diner by chance, if you just go past the main diner going north on Route 1 about a half a mile, there's a right-hand turn that goes to Kennebunkport, and there's a left-hand turn. Can't think of the bypass road, I believe it is.
Mm-hmm.
You take that left, and it's only a quarter of a mile up that road on the left. You can't. It's gated. It's not open right now, Keith. You can't get in. It's closed for the winter.
So yeah, okay, good.
They open it up, weather permitting, end of April, 1st of May.
Do they have information online about that?
Yes.
I think you can go online and check it out. It's called Maryland River Campground Resort.
Okay.
Condominium Resort. Maryland River Campground Condominium Campground Resort, I believe.
All right, yeah. That's
Sorry,
great.
we're rookies up there. We've only been there 3 times, so.
Okay.
So if I'm hearing you all correctly, it sounds like there's still a very strong interest in trying to see if we can fulfill your initial charge of prioritizing senior housing. But you also need some more time to digest this information. The push from the state and the federal government for multi-generational affordable housing is not going to go away, and our ability to access some of these funding sources will likely depend on whether or not we're open to some of this. So it sounds like you understand what the hurdles are going to be if we continue to go down that road. I also just want to be upfront that the town itself has to deal with the fact that we don't have affordable housing. It doesn't even equate to 1% within the community, and we are supposed to have at least 10% in the community. And because we do not meet that goal and we do not have a plan in place, a developer could force this upon us. So we want to be proactive to have an answer about how we plan to find some affordable options, and maybe there's other parcels that the town owns, not this parcel, where we need to focus those energies. We're working on IP Mill and a few other locations. So I just want to be upfront that the topic of housing is likely going to be a theme for the community and the town for many years, as it has been for you all, as we've talked about senior housing. And to many of your points, you've been working on this since the 90s. So this has been a long haul to get us to this point. And I know it feels like we haven't made as much progress as we should. I just want to add that for COG, they're realizing the rural needs of our communities and housing as an issue, both for senior populations and multi-generational. And they're working with a group, their name is escaping me at the moment. Mariah probably knows it off the top of her head.
It's CHAPA, Citizen Housing something. I forget what it stands for. Citizens Housing and Planning Association.
And they do this throughout the state. They work with communities, and when they work with communities, it may be the town, but it may not be the town. It may be other interested stakeholders. It may be developers. It may be church groups. It may be just engaged citizens who really want to make sure that housing is accessible to residents within their community. And they help to bring all those different stakeholders together through their model that has proven to be successful, and helping citizens work through these types of hurdles and bring palatable projects forward that the community eventually chooses to adopt, whether it's through long-term land leases like we talked about with this property, issuing RFPs, if it's zoning amendments, whatever it is. But it's something that goes through that deliberative process at town meeting, and it goes through the vetting. So this is an engagement process. This is not a shoehorn a project that the people don't want around. This is really working with the citizens, hearing what they want, hearing their concerns, and trying to find a solution. So this group has been contracted by FRCOG to come and work with, I believe, 3 communities in the county. This is obviously engagement work is hard work, and all of you who've done this type of work in the past know how hard it is to engage your neighbors in these conversations. And so they can only take on so many communities at once, and they met with, I think, 8 of us in the county who are all looking at housing projects and needing to address this. And so we met with them 2 weeks ago, I believe, and discussed what you all have been working on and our challenges. We've discussed some of the other properties like IP Mill in town that may lend itself to housing. We don't know if they're willing to take on Irving, but they may. And I think we're in a pretty proactive position to work with them and work with this group. So I bring that up to say that there may be this other opportunity that's coming with FRCOG, with some professional people who do this work throughout the state. And they may be able to not only engage us all as a senior housing committee, but also engage the town and the citizens on this general issue of housing. And again, whether these projects go together, whether they're 2 distinct projects, with different approaches and how we get there, I don't think any of us know the answer to that question. But I just want to be upfront that there's all of these external factors that we're trying to deal with and try to find opportunities to still achieve the goals that you've been working on for decades. So if it makes sense to have this group, if we are invited to work with them, if it makes sense to have them come meet with you all to hear from you directly and to see where we can find some synergy, If not, if they're going to work with just general community members, I just want you to be aware that that work is out there potentially as well. But I think it's all to the same ends. I think we're all trying to accomplish the same things. Irving just is a community that is a little bit farther behind on this topic than maybe some of our peers. And I know that we want to do it in a very thoughtful way. And I think you've all been very clear in articulating the concerns and the thoughts that you have about this matter. So I think we have a little more research to do for whenever you decide your next meeting is.
So Brian and Mariah, can the two of you follow up on Rule Development Incorporated and to kind of get more of an idea of what I got the sense that what you presented is that they're willing to do a project in some form in the future in Irving.
They want to do, as Paula noted, they are currently building in Sunderland. And when we were first putting out our RFP, Sunderland had put out their RFP, so the two projects were happening around the same time. They became the developer in Sunderland. They were selected through that process, and that is under construction now. So what they are looking at, as Mariah noted, these projects are at least 3 to 5 years out. So they're looking for their next project.
Okay.
They are a firm that is really interested in Irving, and they're really interested in doing work here. So they are likely going to respond to whatever RFP you put out. They were just trying to be upfront with us, and because they have this community focus, trying to let us know what they're looking for when they're trying to think about what project do they want to put a response in for. So I think we can throw out to them that we've had these conversations and some new questions came up. They may be willing to give us their thoughts on that. I just want to be clear that they may be a future project proposal. They're not going to be the only firm. They don't work for us.
Okay.
So it would just be them sharing their thoughts and their opinion like they have to date. It's not the be all end all, and there's other firms out there who may have similar and or slightly different takes on these types of projects or different focuses. You know, some of these nonprofits have certain missions. There may be developers out there that have a specific mission that may align more with your project and would want to know about this. So,
right.
So yes, we can follow up with them. I just want to be clear about the context with which they may provide information.
And can we also follow up with the FOCOG and see if there's space still available in their program to talk to Irving?
So they need to select us, and that's why we had our kind of like our interview meeting with them. The organization and FOCOG will be selecting, I think it was 3 or 4 communities. So we've done our part, and now we just wait to hear back.
Okay.
But it should be soon, Bill. It was supposed to be in a few weeks. It wasn't supposed to be drawn out. And we were, I think, their second to last interviewees. So.
Okay. All right, then.
One last thing I was just going to say was I finally found the email, and it looks like in Betsy's database, it looks like Becky and Denise both need to be sworn in again to their position.
I thought I already did,
Awesome.
but I'll go down.
I would just reach out to Bets first and double check, but that's what she had sent me.
Okay,
Okay.
I will go down.
I would call first to make sure she's there.
Yeah.
Right, with COVID, everybody's spread out. Do you all have a date and time that you want your next meeting? So that.
So,
Wait, I have one more thing. I just got an email from the lady at CHAPA that said that we've been selected.
so what does that mean?
I don't know, I'm reading, hold on.
I believe, Bill, it means that we're going to get some professional expertise help with guiding a community through housing projects. I don't know that specifically a senior. It's probably addressing housing as a whole issue, of which obviously seniors are part. But it sounds like
It looks like they're offering to meet with us again and kind of come up with some goals and a plan, and whether we want to partner with Montague on this because of some of the overlap in our neighborhoods or not. So I think Brian and I will continue having that conversation, and the next time we all have a meeting, we can kind of report back with what the actual offer is.
Okay. I'm looking at Wednesday, March 3rd for our next meeting. Remote, same time.
March 3rd. It's only 3 weeks.
That evening is potentially a planning board meeting, but that would not be until well after the time that we are at now.
So you're thinking a 1 hour meeting again?
Yes.
No, it over?
Yep.
Okay. We can put it on the calendar.
Is that okay with the committee?
Fine.
Okay.
Well, we'll meet March 3rd, 3 p.m. And the agenda will be a follow-up on what we just learned today that from the FOCOG, and a decision by the committee to in which direction we want to go in.
Okay.
Give everybody time to think about that. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Keith.
Thanks,
I was
Brian.
wondering if anybody knew why we're not recycling anymore in the trash.
You are recycling.
I know I'm recycling, but when they pick up the trash, they all goes in the same truck.
It looks like they're rear loaded, but there's two different cavities within the truck.
You better take a look. I know that they do have trucks like that. I've seen them here, but you take a look at some of the trucks they come around in. They throw it all in the same trash bin.
We've had that complaint from residents, and we've issued it to them. It's illegal to do that, and we've made that clear. I will follow up with them again, and if it's observed, I want to know about it because that would be illegal. You're absolutely right. Okay. All right. Thank you for letting me know.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, everybody.
You all.
See you on
Thank you.
see you on the 3rd.
Thank you.